so much for having me.
So I'm going to start with something that's been in the news. I don't have to tell you that you made some comments recently that are generating a lot of controversy. And I want to remind the audience and our viewers of what you had said. You were talking about people here in small towns in Pennsylvania suffering economic hardship. And you said, quote, "It's not surprising they get bitter, they cling to guns or religion or antipathy to people who aren't like them." And to a lot of the religious leaders in this room, to a lot of decent, hardworking people out there, it may have come across as you attacking their values or their religion, suggesting that people are clinging to religion.
Well, first of all, Scripture talks about clinging to what's good. And so it's very important. My words may have been clumsy, which happens surprisingly often on a presidential campaign. But this is something that I've talked about before, I've talked about in my own life, which is that religion is a bulwark, a foundation when other things aren't going well. That's true in my own life, through trials and tribulations. And so what I was referring to was in no way demeaning a faith that I myself embrace. What I was saying is that when economic hardship hits in these communities, what people have is they've got family, they've got their faith, they've got the traditions that have been passed on to them from generation to generation. Those aren't bad things. That's what they have left. And unfortunately, what people have become bitter about, and oftentimes have told me about as I traveled through not just Pennsylvania, but I was referring to states all across the Midwest, including my home state, is any confidence that the government is listening to them. They don't think that government's listening to them. So I think it is very important to understand, and I think it's unfortunate that in the political process, presidential campaigns, that people have been trying to misconstrue my words. To understand that I am a devout Christian, that I started my work working with churches in the shadow of steel plants that had closed on the south side of Chicago, that nobody in a presidential campaign on the Democratic side in recent memory has done more to reach out to the church and talk about what are our obligations religiously in terms of doing good works, and how does that inform our politics. So, I think that this is an example of frankly, how the political debate can distract us from what is really at issue, and that is how are we going to create a just and fair society where people are getting a fair shake. And that's why I'm running this campaign.
And Hillary Clinton, who was just here, said you're being elitist.
Well, that is, I think, a good example of what happens on the presidential campaign, is that we try to tear each other down instead of lifting the country up. But the notion that somebody like myself, who has been working in churches since I got out of college, and whose entire trajectory, not just during this campaign, but long before, has been to talk about how Democrats need to get in church, reach out to evangelicals, link faith with the work that we do. The notion that somehow I'm standing above that, when that's essentially describes much of what I've been doing over the last 20 years, doesn't make much sense.
Senator, do you believe that God intervenes in history and rewards or punishes people or nations in real time for their behavior?
What I believe is that God intervenes, but that his plans are a little too mysterious for me to grasp. And so what I try to do is, as best I can, be an instrument of his will, to act in what I think is accordance to the precepts of my faith. And if I'm acting in an ethical way, if I am working to make sure that I'm applying what I consider to be a core value of Christianity, but also a core value of all great religions, and that is that I'm my brother's keeper and my sister's keeper, then then I will be doing my part to move his agenda forward. I don't know what that master plan is, and I don't presume to know. And I think that none of us know. But what we do, what I think we can do, is to act in ways that that are consonant with the values that that we cherish. And sometimes that's harder to do in politics than it should be. But I think that's what's demanded of us.
Let's take a question from Reverend Samuel Rodriguez, who's with us. He's president of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference. Reverend?
Senator Obama, the vast majority of Americans believe that abortion is a decision to be made by a woman, her family, and her doctors. However, the vast majority of Americans similarly believe that abortion is the taking of a human life. Do the terms pro-choice and pro-life, do they encapsulate that reality in our 21st century setting, and can we find common ground?
I absolutely think we can find common ground. And it requires a couple of things. Number one, it requires us to acknowledge that there is a moral dimension to abortion, which I think that all too often those of us who are pro-choice have not talked about or tried to tamp down. I think that's a mistake, because I think all of us understand that it is a wrenching choice for anybody to think about. The second thing, once we acknowledge that, is to recognize that people of goodwill can exist on both sides. Right? That nobody wishes to be placed in a circumstance where they're even confronted with the choice of abortion. How we determine what's at that moment, I think people of goodwill can differ. And if we can acknowledge that much, then we can certainly agree on the fact that we should be doing everything we can to avoid unwanted pregnancies that might even lead somebody to consider having an abortion. And we've actually made progress over the last several years in reducing teen pregnancies, for example. And what I've consistently talked about is to take a comprehensive approach where we focus on abstinence, where we're teaching the sacredness of sexuality to our children. But we also recognize the importance of good medical care for women, that we're also recognizing the importance of age-appropriate education to reduce risks. I do believe that contraception has to be part of that education process. And if we do those things, then I think that we can reduce abortions, and I think we should make sure that adoption is an option for people out there. If we put all those things in place, then I think we will take some of the edge off the debate. We're not going to completely resolve it. I mean, at some point there may just be an irreconcilable difference. And those who are opposed to abortion, I think, should continue to be able to lawfully object and try to change the laws. Those of us, like myself, who believe that in this difficult situation it is a woman's responsibility and choice to make in consultation with her doctor and her pastor and her family, I think we will continue to suggest that that's the right legal framework to deal with the issue. But at least we can start focusing on how to move in a better direction than the one that we've had in the past.